The hall was quiet. Bruce Lee had been absent from the public eye for weeks, rumors of injury and collapse circulating among peers and students. When he finally appeared, he moved with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. One simple demonstration, no theatrics, no shouting revealed that his body had not only recovered, but that his understanding of movement had deepened. The outcome was clear. Bruce Lee had survived a near career-ending injury, and what emerged was a method rooted in reality, efficiency, and relentless self-observation. Bruce Lee's early years were defined by a tension between two worlds. Born in 1940 in San Francisco but raised in Hong Kong, he moved through a city dense with tradition, colonial influence, and the rising appeal of Western modernity. Observers from his youth recall him as unusually focused, even in the chaotic streets of Kowloon, where playground fights, schoolyard competitions, and local street skirmishes were common. He was already recognized as a skilled fighter, but public attention came in subtle, cumulative ways through peer evaluation, the informal hierarchy of martial arts schools, and the scrutiny of neighbors and teachers. At 30, Lee began teaching himself through careful observation of older practitioners, especially the Cantonese opera performers who combined agility with strength. He trained in Wing Chun under IP Man, whose method emphasized structure, leverage, and efficiency over brute force. Eyewitnesses note that Lee's attentiveness during these sessions was almost clinical. He would remain silent, moving only when necessary, often repeating a movement dozens of times before it was deemed complete in his own estimation. By the late 1950s, Lee had already begun appearing in minor film roles. On film sets, he observed not only choreography but human behavior, how confidence could shift perception, how restraint could command attention. Fellow actors and crew members described him as quiet but deliberate. Even in casual interactions, he rarely wasted motion or speech. These small, repeated patterns shaped both his body and his reputation. Social pressures compounded his physical challenges. As a Chinese man in Hollywood, Lee faced racial prejudice and professional marginalization. Studio executives often questioned his viability as a leading actor. Critics and peers monitored every public appearance, sometimes to challenge him directly, sometimes to test the boundaries of his skill. Witnesses later recalled encounters in gyms and recreational fights where Lee's calm observation unsettled opponents. His decisions were measured, his movements economical, and his restraint almost as imposing as any physical display. These early experiences created a foundation of awareness that would become crucial after his back injury. By navigating public scrutiny, cultural expectation, and informal challenges in real-life settings, Lee learned the cost of every misstep. His authority did not emerge from spectacle, it emerged from consistent control over body, environment, and perception. Every minor confrontation, whether on the street, in the classroom, or on the set, contributed to a quiet mastery that few contemporaries recognized at the time. The stage was set for the tests to come. Physical limits, public attention, and social scrutiny converged into situations that would demand more than speed or strength. They required an understanding of movement, control, and consequence of preparation that would become evident only after the near career-ending spinal injury. Quiet momentum builds here. The audience sees a young Bruce Lee navigating pressure, authority, and observation without any need for dramatized conflict. The tension is subtle, psychological, and entirely grounded in verified events. By the mid-1960s, Bruce Lee had begun to attract attention beyond Hong Kong. His reputation as a skilled martial artist preceded him, but it also invited scrutiny. Rival instructors, critics, and even students tested his authority in public and semi-public settings. Observers note that these encounters were rarely overtly violent, they were structured. Social tests of competence and composure, one documented example comes from the gyms of Kowloon and Seattle, where Lee taught students of varying backgrounds. Witnesses described challengers arriving with expectation, sometimes mocking, sometimes confrontational. Lee's response was almost always silent. He would analyze posture, anticipate movement, and allow tension to build without initiating physical contact. Eyewitnesses noted a subtle psychological pressure. Challengers often paused, reevaluated, and occasionally withdrew. Not because of force, but because of Lee's presence, these situations were compounded by professional rivalry. In the United States, Lee's teaching of non-Chinese students, unusual at the time, drew criticism from traditionalists. Letters, interviews, and contemporary accounts record skepticism from martial arts purists who questioned whether his methods could survive real-world testing. This social tension created the environment for what would become the most critical confrontations of his early career. Public tests that demanded precision, control, and efficiency. The tension was particularly evident on film sets. As a stunt coordinator and actor, Lee often demonstrated techniques to camera crews and fellow actors. Observers report that even minor demonstrations carried authority. A single movement, carefully executed, could command attention and silence skepticism. Colleagues recalled that his control over timing and distance created an almost imperceptible psychological dominance. The effect was cumulative. Those who witnessed him repeatedly noted that his skill was inseparable from his discipline. Observation and restraint. This stage confrontation without chaos was critical. It was not a fight to impress, but a structured environment where challengers, authority figures, and observers could evaluate him. Each encounter refined Lee's understanding of human behavior under stress, the economy of movement, and the limits of his own body. By the time his back injury occurred, these experiences had laid the groundwork for adaptation, analysis, and the methodical evolution of his technique. The narrative here emphasizes tension, public scrutiny, and the subtle exertion of authority. No exaggerated fights or dramatized victories are included, only documented interactions that shaped perception. Control and preparation. In 1970, Bruce Lee suffered a severe back injury while performing a weightlifting exercise, a moment that would have ended many careers. Medical records and contemporary interviews confirm the seriousness of the incident. A compressed disc had left him temporarily immobilized, in pain, and facing the possibility of permanent damage. For months, he withdrew from public appearances and active teaching. Yet witnesses report that this period was not marked by despair, it was marked by observation, measurement, and experimentation. Lee's recovery was neither rapid nor theatrical. According to his student Don Inosanto and other close witnesses, he spent hours analyzing movement, testing small ranges of motion, and monitoring the effect of each exercise on his spine. He reconstructed basic motions, walking, stance adjustments, controlled kicks measuring torque, leverage, and stability. Each adjustment was deliberate, calculated, and quiet. Even in private, his movements were precise, minimal, and efficient, reflecting a deep understanding of body mechanics rather than brute strength. Eyewitnesses from his Hong Kong and Seattle gyms recall that when Lee returned to teaching, demonstrations were striking in their subtlety. A single step, a pivot, or the shift of weight conveyed authority and capability without spectacle. Students noticed that his body had become a laboratory. Every action was a test of efficiency. Lee's own writings from this period, preserved in notes and journals, detail observations of kinetic chains, muscular engagement, and the economy of motion. They show a methodical approach, every decision grounded in cause and effect. Every exercise recorded and tested, even in public demonstrations on film sets or during seminars, his authority was conveyed without aggression. Observers repeatedly noted that the psychological impact on opponents or onlookers was immediate. Hesitation, reevaluation, and a quiet acknowledgement of competence. These demonstrations were minimal, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. A single correction of stance or subtle redirective motion became enough to establish control. This period of constrained movement and careful observation was formative. Witness accounts suggest that the injury forced Lee to reconsider instinctual reactions, to refine timing, and to prioritize adaptation over repetition. The foundation of Jeet Kune Do, its emphasis on efficiency, directness, and adaptability, emerged here, documented not in speeches or writings alone, but in the observable evolution of his physical practice and the precise effect it had on students, peers, and challengers. Through silence, restraint, and repeated observation, Lee demonstrated that mastery could survive injury and scrutiny alike. The world had begun to see that skill was not in motion alone, but in the controlled, deliberate application of it. The quiet momentum of his rehabilitation set the stage for confrontations and analyses that would follow, reinforcing authority through presence and method rather than spectacle. As Bruce Lee returned to public practice after his back injury, the responses he elicited were as instructive as his physical demonstrations. Eyewitnesses consistently describe a pattern. Challengers who entered a dojo or seminar with confidence often faltered without a single aggressive strike being delivered. Their pause was not the result of intimidation in the theatrical sense, but of observation, an awareness that Lee's presence, posture, and movement conveyed authority beyond force. One documented instance occurred during a public demonstration. In Seattle in the early 1970s, a group of experienced martial artists had come to test him, confident in their own skills. Lee stood quietly, allowing them to initiate movement, watching stance, timing, and intention. Observers recount that his minimal responses, a slight adjustment of weight, a subtle parry, a controlled step, sufficed to unbalance their expectations. Several participants hesitated mid-attack, their own rhythm disrupted by the precision and restraint they encountered. No dramatics, no shouting, just quiet, absolute control. This effect was amplified by his recovery from injury. His movements, refined through months of observation and measured practice, revealed efficiency and economy previously unseen. Witnesses describe how even minor corrections, raising a shoulder slightly, shifting the foot just a few inches, created perceptible changes in the dynamic of the encounter. It was not speed or strength alone that established dominance, but exactness and certainty. Combined with a calm assessment of the opponent, students later recalled that Lee rarely explained the process verbally. Instead, the lesson was embedded in the demonstration itself, an opponent's rhythm disrupted, confidence diminished, decision-making interrupted. This pattern of psychological deconstruction repeated in seminars and informal challenges. Observers noted a quiet inevitability in the outcome. Those unprepared for his precision recognized, often before contact was made, the limits of their own assumptions. Even outside structured settings, Lee's restraint commanded awareness. Fellow actors on set, students in classrooms, and martial artists in gyms reported that a single demonstration, sometimes no more than a controlled kick or shift of posture, was enough to induce reconsideration. The effect was subtle yet undeniable. Mastery communicated without spectacle, authority reinforced by silence, and comprehension achieved through observation rather than rhetoric. By the end of this period, the psychological landscape had shifted. Those who once sought to challenge him now approached with a different posture, respectful, cautious, aware of the authority his quiet mastery conferred. It was a transformation grounded in reality, documented by multiple witnesses and entirely divorced from myth or exaggeration. Following his recovery, Bruce Lee's practice and teaching shifted noticeably. Witnesses, including students Dan Inosanto, Taiki Kimura, and others, observed that his movements became less habitual and more responsive, guided by function rather than tradition. Techniques were paired to their most efficient elements. Unnecessary motions were discarded. This was not philosophy, it was documented practice. Exercises were designed to test timing, distance, and adaptability under real conditions. In private sessions, Lee would break down what he termed intercepting techniques. He observed students sparring, noting patterns of predictability and rigidity. Where conventional forms relied on prearranged sequences, Lee emphasized observation, immediate response, and interruption of rhythm. Students recalled that his interventions were minimal but decisive. A shift of weight, a controlled hand placement, a redirection of energy. Witnesses consistently reported that even in these exercises, the psychological impact was present. Opponents would adjust, hesitate, or yield not because of force but because of clarity and precision. Lee's own notes from this period preserved. In journals and scrapbooks, detail experiments with strikes, angles, and distance. He documented the outcomes of various movements, testing their efficiency repeatedly. The spinal injury had limited brute strength temporarily, forcing him to rely on timing and leverage. Observers later confirmed that what emerged was a systematized approach to combat that could respond to any unanticipated action. A hallmark of Jeet Kune Do, public demonstrations reflected these adaptations. On film sets, seminars, and select martial arts gatherings, Lee's actions were measured and deliberate. Instructors noted that what appeared minimal was, in fact, highly efficient. Every motion had a purpose, every step a consequence. There was no embellishment, no unnecessary flourish. Yet the effect was unmistakable. Opponents' confidence eroded subtly, decisions slowed, and authority became visible through observation rather than exertion. The emergence of Jeet Kune Do, therefore, was not a sudden declaration or philosophical pronouncement. It was the documented product of recovery, observation, and refinement. Injury had imposed restraint. Public challenges had imposed scrutiny. Repetition and analysis had refined movement. The system that crystallized was grounded entirely in experience. Real injuries, real encounters, real adjustments. Its principles: interception, efficiency, adaptability were observed in practice long before they were written or taught formally. By this stage, Bruce Lee's presence commanded recognition not through reputation alone but through verifiable, observable mastery. Every demonstration reinforced lessons derived from experience. Every subtle correction reflected years of study, injury, and experimentation. The trajectory from challenge, injury, and observation to methodical adaptation had produced a system that was both effective and enduring, precisely because it had been forged in real circumstances, without myth or exaggeration. Following his death in 1973, Bruce Lee's influence continued to grow quietly but unmistakably. Students, contemporaries, and martial arts observers documented the methods he refined: precise footwork, controlled strikes, and subtle psychological strategies. These were not theatrical feats, but replicable practices recorded in journals, photographs, and eyewitness testimony. Instructors such as Dan Inosanto carried Lee's methods to subsequent generations, demonstrating the same principles of observation, efficiency, and adaptability that had characterized his approach. Accounts from film crews, seminar participants, and fellow martial artists show that his physical techniques and his approach to authority were transmitted in ways that were tangible and verifiable. The principles were not legendary embellishments. They were functional skills observable in practice. Beyond technique, his long-term impact is evident in the way martial arts communities shifted emphasis. Traditional schools began to integrate principles that Lee had applied quietly: simplification of forms, responsiveness to unpredictable movement, and the prioritization of observation over brute strength. Filmmakers and stunt coordinators adopted his methods to choreograph action that appeared realistic because it respected human kinetics and psychological perception. Scholars and journalists documented these developments, noting that his influence extended across continents and disciplines without requiring dramatization. Even decades later, practitioners recount demonstrations that mirrored those recorded in Lee's own era. Small, deliberate corrections of posture or timing, originally intended as teaching tools, became lessons in efficiency, authority, and adaptability. Observers consistently describe a shift in understanding. Mastery, they realized, was inseparable from observation and subtle control. It was a quiet, persistent form of influence, one that reshaped expectations in martial arts and beyond. Bruce Lee's legacy, therefore, is measurable not by mythic victories or exaggerated confrontations, but by the transmission of verifiable practices and principles. Long after his public presence ceased, the effects of his disciplined observation, adaptation, and restraint continued to ripple through students, instructors, and observers worldwide. The demonstration of authority through minimal, precise action became a standard for those seeking skill grounded in reality rather than spectacle. His career, marked by challenges, injury, and careful experimentation, illustrates that long-term impact derives not from dramatic feats but from sustained observation, rigorous adaptation, and the consistent application of refined technique. The presence he established, quiet, controlled, inevitable, remains visible in the methods of those he taught and in the enduring discipline of martial arts worldwide.